Okay, hi. Today we are learning about contemplative art. We're going to be looking at 224 and 227. As I go through both of these, I want for you to be taking notes just like normal in your notebook. So find 224 to begin with, and we are going to begin. So 224 is the gates. It was installed in New York City, U.S. by Christo and Jeanne-Claude from 1979 to 2005, and we'll talk about that kind of big span of time in a second. And it's a mixed media installation, so we are going to, hopefully I'm tech savvy and this will work, we're going to start with this video of the gates. Okay, so that was video of the gates installed in New York City. So the gates are obviously site-specific art. And as a review, we've talked about Spiral Jetty, which was our kind of first major site-specific art. And these are artworks that are made for a specific location. And that makes them different from traditional art because they cannot be bought or sold at the art market, in a gallery, no art dealers or anything like that. And site-specific art kind of invites the viewer in to participate with the artwork, consider our relationship to specific places in the world around us. So the gates, let's get into kind of the logistics of them. As you saw from that video, there were thousands and thousands of these bright orange gates. Jeanne-Claude and Christo were the artists who made this, and the gates was altogether 7,500 individual gates, and they lined 23 miles of walkways in Central Park in New York City. So this is kind of an aerial picture of the gates, and they lined 23 miles of Central Park. And they were up and installed February 12th through the 26th in 2005. Each gate was 16 feet high, and they varied in width from about 5 feet to 18 feet. The poles here are just made of regular kind of vinyl, and then they have this fabric that's suspended from them. So if we think back to kind of post and lintel with Stonehenge, the fabric is attached to the lintel part of our gate here. The fabric panels were hung from the top of the lintel, so that way they were free to move in the breeze and with the wind. That video showed them after it had snowed in New York City, just kind of blowing in the wind, not too many people out at that time. All of the fabrics were hung 7 feet above the ground, so that way they didn't touch the ground and people could walk under them. And Christo and Jeanne-Claude specifically picked this color because they wanted it to contrast with the environment around Central Park and New York City during that time. They were, like we saw in that video, this kind of bright orange contrasting with the very white and very kind of gloomy winter scene that we have in New York City during that time. So another formal kind of thing about this work is that the way that they chose to install it in Central Park is this very organic arrangement. And I don't know if any of you have ever visited New York City, but New York City is laid out on a grid. So there's blocks, there's streets, everything is horizontal and vertical, and it's this grid system. So there's this kind of contrast between being in New York City and then exploring and adventuring through Central Park. So we have this kind of wonderful experience of people being able to kind of walk through these gates, whether they walk through the park normally or maybe this kind of was something new or special for them to experience. I have a second video for us to watch, and we'll just watch a little bit of this, but you can see more people interacting with the gates here. Okay, I forgot the music was with that. I'm so sorry. So the gates, people interacting with them. So it was this very kind of interactive thing. So let's talk more about our artists, Jeanne-Claude and Christo. So they were married, and they emerged as artists in the early 70s. So right kind of on the heel of Robert Smithson and our earth artists. They create works that are kind of vast in scale and temporary. So after their works are installed, they are completely dismantled, and then the materials are recycled. So they're this very kind of ephemeral thing. They don't last very long. They're up for a short amount of time. Like this was up for 2 weeks. 14 days, can you imagine? And then it was taken down and recycled, like many of their other artworks. For them to do this, there's a lot of logistics involved. They have to get permission from governing boards, which can take many, many years. And then to fund these, their artworks are funded completely by the artists. They do not accept any sponsors or donations, which is very unusual. They typically, Jeanne-Claude and Christo use fabric, and they tend to wrap a lot of things. So in the 80s, they kind of wrapped these two islands outside of Miami with this bright pink fabric. So there's an island here and an island here and there. I'm going to post this so that way you can watch these little videos if you are interested. They also did this piece here, which is called Running Fence, and it is this miles and miles and miles of fence that's wrapped in this white fabric, and it creates this very kind of stunning line that chases around the landscape. And then last, they wrapped an entire museum in Berlin. And here you can see all of the people who came out to see this museum wrapped in this white fabric, which is very monumental. Like, how incredible. And then here are some of the workers kind of unrolling the fabric for this. And I don't remember how long this was wrapped, but not too long. So they love to wrap things in fabric. So why fabric? That seems weird, right? I have a quote for you. So they said, fabric is like a second skin. It is very related to the human existence. So the idea of fabric being kind of like we have our actual skin and then we also dress in our clothing. So it's this thing that's very personal to us and very relatable. Let's see here. So why temporary? Why would they put so much and so many years of work into something that is just going to take down? So they said our works are temporary in order to endow the works with a fleeting urgency in order to, oops, I have that twice on there. To endow the works with a tenderness brought by the fact that they will not last. So the fact that these things will only be wrapped, only be presented for so long makes them so much more special. People want to go out and experience them in those 14 days when they'll be there. So it's that kind of, it's only going to last for so long, and that's what makes it special. So the gates, let's talk more logistics. So they first proposed this idea in 1981. That's where we get kind of our attribution from. They had been thinking of it in the late 70s, but they officially proposed it to New York City in 1981, and it did not gain final approval until 2013. Many decades later. And it cost them $21 million to make this. And like I said, they don't take any sponsors or donations, so this was completely funded by their drawings, prints, and books that the artists have sold. All of their works are temporary, so none of them kind of stay anywhere. It's not like our Narcissus Garden with Yayoi Kusama, and she made it at the Venice Biennale and then it's been traveling the world afterwards. That's not how Christo and Jeanne-Claude do their artwork. So they create their artworks and then often they'll photograph them, and they have like art books that they sell. So they funded this completely by themselves, which I think is incredible. And for the people who went to see it, it was completely free. So they did not have to pay anything to go and visit it. And so the gates, their function was just to kind of change the way that people interact with this original site, the way that people interact with New York City. They wanted to give it as this source of beauty and joy to the city, and this kind of big celebration in itself. And if we think to some of the other things that we've looked at in our history, specifically our torii gates from Japan, they're very similar, right? Torii gates are these fancy post and lintels that kind of frame beautiful spots in Japan. Think of Shintoism, the idea that spirits and gods and deities kind of live and come out of and reside in these beautiful places, and so therefore really beautiful places are holy and they're framed by these torii gates. We also have like a series of torii gates like this, so very similar to the gates that Jeanne-Claude and Christo are also creating. So I would have loved to have gone and visited this, but alas, I did not because I was in elementary school. But I think that it is just kind of a really incredible artwork that takes something very ordinary and everyday to these people and kind of transforms it into this special experience. So that's The Gates by Christo and Jeanne-Claude. Now let's move on to our next artwork, which is Summer Trees by Song Soo Nam, 1983, ink on paper. This is number 227 for you to find. So, Song Soo Nam is a Korean artist, and Song is actually his last name. So we are just going to refer to him as Song because that's his last name. So he was born in 1938 when Japan still occupied Korea. And he grew up during World War II. So that's when Southern Korea was controlled by the US and Northern Korea was controlled by the Soviet Union. And then when he was 10, Korea officially split into North and South Korea. And then as a result of that, we have the Korean War in the 50s. And we know with war, we have a lot of destruction and damage and loss and just a lot of really horrible things. And then ever since then, the U.S. has had a military presence in South Korea, and we know if you pay attention to the news, we often have a lot of issues with North Korea currently. So that's kind of the context of Song's background as kind of a Korean. So he became an artist, and he was one of the leaders of a art movement called the Oriental Ink Movement. And this started in the 80s, and it was kind of the result of the fact that a lot of these artists wanted to recover a national identity. So they had been through a lot of turmoil and this kind of splitting of their country and wars. They wanted this kind of new art form to be this new national identity for them. So Korea is this industrialized country, and their art was a desire for this Korean identity rooted in their traditions and history. So our Oriental Ink Movement artworks often have a lot of kind of subtle tonal variation. So think like very monochromatic, soft value changes, and it wants to kind of be this contemplative art form, linking us to inner spirituality, which they thought had been lost during the modern technological age. So if we think to kind of some of our previous artworks that we've talked about with our Travelers Among Mountains and Streams, this kind of Taoist, Neo-Confucianist artwork that we use to contemplate our place in the world, maybe use it as like a form of meditation. We have the same thing with The Bay by Helen Frankenthaler. These kind of very calm, color-filled, very minimal paintings that are just calm and meditative and contemplative. So the Oriental Ink Movement was very much influenced by our second phase of abstract expressionism, which we know is color field painting. It's calmer, more meditative. This is our Helen Frankenthaler painting. These are two artworks here by an artist called Morris Lewis. And what he does with his artworks is he pours thinned acrylic resin down an unprimed canvas, and so he kind of creates these long paint pours on his canvases. We know that Helen Frankenthaler put her canvases flat on the floor and poured paint onto them and then kind of pushed it around. So what Song Soo Nam is doing is he is taking kind of Lewis's technique, but with ink on paper. So he's taking these ink washes and letting them drip down his papers. And the fact that he is using ink on paper is very, very, very traditional for Korean art. That was the preferred medium of East Asian literati. So scholar poets, scholar artists, think of that kind of ideal man. Oh shoot, I forget his name. Oh man, I really forget. Okay, someone's gonna have to message me on Remind when you're listening to this with the name of the artwork. Sin Sukju. Okay, I finally got it. Sorry that you had to listen to that. Like our Sin Sukju. So anyway, ink on paper, preferred medium, very traditional for Korean artists, but in a very non-traditional way. Basically non-representational here. But this title that we have here, Summer Trees, suggests this idea of landscape, right? And if we think very abstractly about what Song is painting here, we have these like strong vertical elements, we have darker colors up front, lighter colors in the back, that kind of suggestion of atmospheric perspective. But again, very abstracted, some could even argue for non-representational, but it does have the title of Summer Trees, which kind of reminds us of our Korean and Chinese landscape paintings that we often traditionally have. So these are some more Oriental ink movement artworks. So we have that kind of very minimal, tonal, monochromatic, simple. Here are 3 other Song Sunam artworks. I like this one the best. Personal opinion. So those are our 2 contemplative artworks for today. I have a challenge for you if you're interested. So I want for you, do something that you find contemplative. So that can be, whatever you do to just kind of think and reflect and meditate. For me, that's oftentimes cooking or baking or creating art. I think just creating in general kind of puts me in that mindset. I also really love walking. I might go for a walk after this by myself. So do something that you find contemplative. So go for a walk. I would recommend not listening to any music. It's very interesting to see just kind of where your thoughts and your mind goes. You could rap something like Christo and Jeanne-Claude. If you do that, please send me a picture of what you decide to rap and how you rap it. You could download a meditation app and practice meditating. You could create an ink wash painting. And if you're thinking, Miss Bartel, I do not have ink wash, get creative. You could use coffee, you could use some other thing that you have. Get creative with it. Okay. So, contemplative art challenge. Interested to see what you guys do.